It's a rant about reality. And I think that's the problem with Flutter. Flutter devs don't live in reality. They live in their own abstract Skya world. I, as a developer of an application, can push code that changes that application without Apple or Google reviewing it. They don't even let you go to the site. It's just a showcase. Cool. This isn't a showcase for Flutter for web because nobody ever wants to show off their Flutter for web. Flutter is a mistake in almost every sense still. And it's sad that it's as bad as it is. It genuinely is a little sad. But I want to take it a step further. Unless you really know what you're doing, it is irresponsible to ship Flutter. It is actually harmful, not just like as an elitist developer that has opinions, but to your users in so many ways. Not using React Native specifically is choosing to prioritize your beliefs over your users for one simple reason. So, Flutter is harming your users. Not using RN when you can is... I'm gonna reword this. Not shipping React Native when you could is choosing to harm your users. I am prepared to die on this hill now. I know that's a bold way of putting this. I don't care anymore. I have talked to enough people working in enough other solutions that I am certain of this fact for one particular reason. Code push. For those that don't know this, the idea of code push is I, as a developer of an application, can push code that changes that application without Apple or Google reviewing it. If I am building the Twitch app and we ship a new chat feature and we screw it up, we hit the wrong endpoint or something's wrong in the UI, we formatted it incorrectly. The process is I hit up Apple, I tell them to pull the update. Any users who have installed the update in that time, they're on the bad version. Sucks, but that's their lives now. I go hack out the update, send it to Apple, who has to re-review it, realizes there's some other thing inside of the app that they don't like, that they block on, even though this update isn't a feature ad, it's a bug fix. But they happen to see a feature they don't like during the bug fix, and now they block your update. You can't get that update out to users. Then a week later, you convince them to let you. You finally get the update out. And then after a month or two, about 2/3 of your users have installed that update. But for whatever reason, that 100 to 5,000 users who happen to install the bad version don't have automatic updates on and never end up getting that update. They're stuck on a legacy version, and you can't do anything other than maybe lock them out on server side if you build that in yourself. There is no way to trigger an update, even a small bug fix, on a user on their device without Apple or Google approving your app. This is the problem with Swift and Kotlin native apps. This is also the problem with Flutter. This is absolutely a problem with Flutter. You are wrong, Codemaster. I've talked to a lot of Flutter developers, and every single one ships the entire Flutter runtime and all of their Flutter code inside of their app binaries. There is not a meaningful code push solution in Flutter right now. That is false. Expo is the solution to this problem. Expo has solved this very well in React Native land. The reason why is important to understand. So we're going to draw out, how do I want to draw this? We're going to call this app UI at the top and bare metal at the bottom. This guy, we'll call it Renderland. This is the stack of from the metal that is like the CPU and GPU on your phone to the app UI, how things get rendered. We have this first level that's like the kernel or something, just like a communication layer where software can access bare metal. There's actually a render engine, funny enough, called Metal by Apple. That is the next layer. This is how you access the like GPU abstractions if you want to do native rendering as performant as possible. Then there is, I'll say this is the iOS render stack just to make it a little easier so I don't have to multiply it. Here is UIKit, which is the UI layer built on top of render engine that lets you render user interfaces. This is where you say, hey, put a button at this point in the screen, and then it renders in iOS a button there in the screen. This is the, I guess I should put like uh, Objective-C slash Swift dev code. So this code tells UIKit what to render, which then in Metal renders things using the computer, in this case phone's hardware, to then generate a UI that the user sees. So this is the iOS render stack as it's existed for a long time. So let's draw out the React Native stack, which is a little different. It's a little lower. Make this box a little longer. So this is Objective-C Swift bindings to UIKit. I'll just call it Objective-C Swift bindings. And then up here, JavaScript or JS that calls. So this layer here is 95% plus of your RN code is this layer here. Whereas these Objective-C Swift bindings are mostly provided by RN. You could argue that what React Native is these bindings directly to UIKit that you can call in JavaScript. The important thing to note here is we are still rendering UIKit components. We're still rendering native UI. The React Native bindings allow us to, in JavaScript, tell UIKit what to render. This Objective-C Swift bindings layer is very thin and is most of the native code that you ship. I think it's incredibly important to understand this detail here. The Objective-C Swift bindings are what your JS calls that then render a native button. Which means, since this section doesn't change a whole lot, you ship this in your app binary. And if you swap out the JS bundle here, like let's say this is hosted on your server and you change it, that is an update for the majority of what's happening on the mobile app. You're able to change almost anything in that app remotely, other than specific Swift and Objective-C bindings. Like if you want to add Spotify native support, or you want to add a camera binding and you didn't have camera permission before, you can't do those types of things. But anything you have the Objective-C or Swift binding included in your binary for, you can change. So if you have a button that's not visible on small iPhones, it's a bug I've run into a billion times, you can make that change, fix it, and ship it without making a native change, because you're just in JavaScript land telling the phone where to put that button slightly differently. So let's talk about Flutter. So in Flutter, we have to blow out a lot of this. UI kit doesn't get used. We have Skya engine. The Skya rendering engine is an alternative to Objectives or to the UI kit layer on iOS. This is a full abstraction, almost like a game engine. You can think of this like Unity, more like Unity, where this alternative engine has to emulate a lot of what UIKit does, which means things like touch gestures, things like scrolling, things like screen reader, things like image rasterization aren't using the OS primitives anymore. They're not using the things that Apple or Android provides. They have been abstracted into their own engine. In order for this to be performant, the Dart Flutter runtime code has to be compiled in order to optimally control the Skya engine there. So this has to be compiled, can't be server hosted. And this is the selling point and the problem. Flutter has chosen to fully reject the native platform while eating all of the native problems because this abstraction isn't a separation. And honestly, what I'm going to do here to make this clearer is a separate box for this because these are abstracted. This JS binding layer is not as strongly attached to the Objective-C layer as these two are. Because these are so directly tied, it is impossible to swap out the meaningful code without shipping a new binary, which means it's irresponsible to use this simply because App Store reviews are going to slow down your process enough that if you make a mistake, you can't meaningfully fix that. I saw a comment along the lines of, isn't this a rant about approval processes? It's a rant about reality. And I think that's the problem with Flutter. Flutter devs don't live in reality. They live in their own abstract Skya world that doesn't embrace the importance of solving problems that users are going to have and solving the problems that developers experience every day as creators of applications. And I cannot count how many times Expo Push and Expo Publish have saved my butt because we had a dumb mistake, just got approved on Apple, and I had to go fix something quick. It is essential to be able to do that. If Apple and Google snap their fingers and let user or developers just immediately ship updates, that kind of helps. But again, since that code is on a device rather than on your server, it is now impossible for you to guarantee a user's on the right version. It is trivial for me to lock users out who are on old versions and update them if reasonably possible. It is not that simple in Flutterland. You have to build your own version system in order to assert people aren't on old versions. And we're just talking about the abstract, like the harm this has to your ability to serve users through the app publication process. Let's go a step deeper, which is Skya is a bad abstraction. There's a lot to dig into here, but I'm going to start with the things I have linked in my FAQ. Did you all know that since February last year, there has been terrible stutter in Flutter apps for iOS that puts it below at 5 FPS consistently because their Skya abstraction is not actually Metal compliant yet. It does not work good on Metal. And the result is hilarious amounts of jank. Oh my God. It's so bad. It's so bad. So, an important thing to know about how Flutter architecturally works is due to being a full new rendering engine, they have to recreate all of the patterns and behaviors that we expect from applications. One of which is every feature in UIKit. So in Flutter, you have the option to use the Material UI skin or I think they call it Cupertino or something for the iOS skin. And those skins for Flutter are obsessive screenshotting of every piece of UI in iOS and an attempt to recreate that with the right PNGs in their render engine. You've effectively been forced to recreate all of UIKit to make anything work. And that's why we have the like cringy fake pop-ups and shit that are so common in Flutter apps. I have a tweet. So the app that inspired this is very specific. It is the VidCon app was absolute trash. This is one of my best tweets. This is uh I don't think I'll ever top this tweet, honestly. Anyways, the VidCon app. The amount of different ways this app broke was impressive. What happened here was a keyboard reveal event got postponed while the side nav came in. The keyboard came out after and shifted the side nav into a state where you couldn't actually see what each of those menu items was. It unrendered the text. Just entirely broken. Other really fun Flutter things. In a Flutter scroll view, due to how they implemented touch gestures, if you use one finger, it'll scroll normal speed. If you use two fingers, it scrolls double speed. If you use three fingers, it scrolls triple speed because it detects each finger and each touch event as a transformation. And they had to write all of that code themselves, and it's full of dumb bugs as a result because they threw away the 2+ decades and thousands of man hours of work put into UIKit to make it so somebody who's blind can use their phone, to make it so somebody who has like physical disabilities can use their phone. Somebody can manage their phone with a mouse, can do all of these things on a device reasonably. And due to how much the Flutter devs hate JavaScript, they decided to throw it all away to make a point. And it was a bad decision. And it sucks because Skya theoretically could be good for video games. If you want to make a mobile game or you wanted to make some really fancy 3D animations and shit. But their choice to re-implement everything is hilarious. Somebody in chat just said it's like re-implementing the DOM in WebGL. It's time to talk about Flutter for Web. Is there an example? Showcase. Cool. Not much here. There's no way this site is. Oh, this isn't the site. This is. They don't even let you go to the site. It's just a showcase. Cool. This isn't a showcase for Flutter for Web because nobody ever wants to show off their Flutter for Web. TLDR on Flutter for Web, it uses a canvas. It doesn't use the DOM. It renders a single canvas and then it recreates the whole DOM inside of it. The minimum I've seen for a Flutter Web like Hello World is like 5 megabytes of bullshit. I have not talked to a Flutter dev who actually thinks Flutter for Web is shippable, thankfully, but it is an embarrassment. It is not real technology, much less usable. It's like meme tier bad. It's actually harmful. If anybody tells you that like Flutter is a great thing compared to React, you can use Flutter for Web. It's fine. You can now ignore their opinion forever because they are lying. They just do not understand how bad things are. It is. I even think React Native for Web is too far in abstraction. Like, give me my DOM and let me manipulate it. But this is the thing I really like about React Native. React Native is not trying to abstract away the platform. They are trying to build the best abstraction to the platform. Actually, a bit different way of doing this. So the gap is between the JS and the Objective-C Swift bindings there. The gap here is that arrow wrong. The gap here is much scarier. It's between the native layer and Skya. It's a mistake. I get the desire. I understand why people wanted to move away, because theoretically, if you can rewrite the section here for other platforms, so like for Android or for web, this is a nice abstraction, it seems. But this will never use the platform, is the problem. So because it has to be re-implemented on something relatively raw, for the browser, we have to re-implement this on Canvas because it doesn't have a way to talk to a DOM. Where in React Native, I can move this React Native JS layer to Xbox, to web, to whatever, and call a different native platform, and it will render the different native thing. React Native is using the platform, which is what's so funny about Flutter to me, is so many people recommend Flutter because React Native is slow. It's an unnecessary abstraction. Flutter lets you have the abstraction and performance. It gives you neither. It's a lie. The promise Flutter is built on is a lie. It is an abstraction from the native platform that is slower, heavier, and incomplete. And that abstraction doesn't give you any meaningful wins other than a vague sense of multi-platform support for iOS and Android. That is a half-truth because of how bad the iOS experience is. Flutter is a different way of building Android apps with a lackluster render story, deploy story, development story, user story on every other platform. On Android, it's whatever. And on every other platform, it is a regression. It is harmful to your users to bet on Flutter. Yeah. End rant. The abstraction is bad, and code push is huge. Code push is super important. Don't block users on Apple, Google. And the native platform is actually good. Rewriting UI kit is probably bad. Cool. So these 2 points are the core. If you want to be able to fix user problems without weeks of potential runtime blocking because of Apple and Google, and you want to use the things that make the native platform great, you should not use Flutter, and you should probably use React Native. Like, yeah, please use React Native. It's very good. Dart is pretty bad. We'll don't even need to do that rant with everything else I just talked about. Thank you for watching that one. I know y'all were not all fond of my last Flutter rant, and there were some things that I focused on too much for not great reasons, and there was things I didn't focus on enough because I didn't realize how bad they were. I think it's important to understand that code push is not something you should compromise on if you don't have to, and the native platform is good, and you should probably use it. Flutter's failure to embrace either of those points makes it a really bad bet, and React Native giving you a really good solution for both of those points makes it relatively safe to bet on right now. For those reasons, I do not recommend Flutter, and I do recommend React Native. Native solutions are cool too, but you don't have a good code push solution there. Make sure you check out how other companies are doing these things as well. Even Meta has a crazy like SQLite layer they use to command the Messenger app for Facebook, and that seems to work really well for them. There's a cool blog post if you Google search for that. Generally, it's important to understand the compromises that your technologies are making, and I don't think Flutter's compromises are understood well enough by its users. React Native's compromises are that you need that native binding layer to do things, and JavaScript's not the fastest way to animate, move things around, etc. But if you understand those reasons, you can make some really cool things with React Native. All that said, really appreciate y'all for watching the video. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't, under 40% of y'all are subscribed to the channel. So please fix that. Helps the algorithm a ton. Leave a comment. Let me know what I should talk about in future videos. Shout out to Des for the awesome work editing, keeping this channel alive for me. Thank you guys again. Peace.